You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos Reyes and Valerie Niemeyer. Today, without special fuss and without making a scene, we'll explore the life and times of the man behind the scenes. Our welcome guest is our producer, and indeed the producer of the full range of WCAT radio and television programs. The president of En route Books and Media, the Peripatetic, Sebastian Mahfood, OP, Ph.D., joins us. Though his heart is in East Texas, St. Louis is the launching pad of his projects and peregrinations. He lives there with his wife, Dr. Stephanie Mahfood, and their children, Alexander and Eva Ruth. Let's begin, as always, in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who have taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that in the same Spirit we may be truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Amen. Dr. Mahfood, Sebastian, could you tell us about your tangled roots and introduce us to your family?
Well, sure. First of all, Jim, thank you, and Mario and Valerie for allowing me to be on your show today. This is quite a pleasure and quite a treat. So my name, as you've already mentioned, is Sebastian Mahfood. The last name is Lebanese, and we can trace our roots back to the grand old city of Beirut in Marjayoun in Lebanon, where my great-grandfather started off on a boat one day to Kingston, Jamaica, where my grandfather was born. So I can claim to be Jamaican, at least in part. He grew up there before moving to Detroit to marry my grandmother. As you know, Phoenicians move every generation. My father was born in Detroit and moved down to Texas, to Tyler, where he met my mother, at Pine Tree High School in Longview, or at Kilgore College, wherever it was they first laid eyes on one another. And I was born of a union between the Lebanese cedar tree and the East Texas pine tree. So evergreen that I am, if I can make that allegory. I grew up in East Texas and met my wife in North Africa in the Peace Corps. And we settled here in St. Louis because I lost a bet. Who would have the better position 1 year after our close of service? And I've been in St. Louis ever since, almost 30 years now. So there you have it, the story from when I was a wee lad of several generations ago to the present day.
I'll just tag on to that the present day inhabitants of Phoenix, hot spot of the U.S. of A., are called Phoenicians.
Hey, how about that?
Yeah. All right, Sebastian. Thank you for that intro. Mario, what next?
Well, after hearing that you come from the Phoenician, that explained me, give a lot of light about your activities. But anyhow, you are also a lay Dominican.
Yes.
Which is a very interesting vocation. How did that came about?
So, in 2006, I'd finished my doctorate and decided I was done with school. And that lasted about 6 months before I realized I wanted to study philosophy.
What?
So I know it. It's a even nobler profession than most others that one could pursue.
Are you sure?
The life of a philosopher, in the person of one who understood, at least in part, the idea that the examined life was more worth living than the unexamined. I began studying at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. They had an online program, and I was hooked from my first metaphysics course. And I came upon a video or a CD from one of the collections that they had by Father Brian Milady. And Father Milady gave a 60-minute talk on the life of Dominican, of study as an act of prayer. And so it occurred to me, wait a second, I've been praying all my life because I could never get away from study, from this desire to learn. You know, as Aristotle says at the beginning of the Metaphysics, all men, and that includes women, Valerie, desire to learn, as is evidenced by the delight they take in their senses. So I walked down the hall. I was teaching at Kenrick Lennon Seminary at the time, to my good friend, Father Tom McDermott, O.P., and said, is there a way I can participate in the life of the Dominican? And he pointed me to a lay Dominican chapter in St. Louis. And by 2008, I was a member. And I've been a lay Dominican now for 15 years. It's a wonderful anniversary date to realize I've been a lay Dominican for 15 years. That's great. So
very good. Jesuit free.
Yes, but I studied at St. Louis University. So I like to balance my pre-Reformation and post-Reformation religious orders.
There's more to your past, and I think Valerie might bring that to light.
Sure.
So I was thinking, speaking of balance, head with, thinking and then being physically active. Once, back in the day, you were apparently wrestling professionally. So tell us more about that. And Dr. Hanning wants to know, were you even then a voice from the periphery?
I was, as you know, from what Roland Barthes tells us in the world of wrestling, the world of wrestling is a spectacle. It is a contest between the powers of good and the powers of evil. The salt of the earth shows up as the audience, and they want to believe that the powers of good will prevail. Yet they spend their days going into and coming out of factories, farms, various industries in the great American Southwest, or at least in the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. And they want to see the underdog get on top, at least once. And we gave it to them about every 6 weeks. The rest of the time, we cheated shamelessly and beat the good guys. And they knew the good guys were beaten because of the cheating. And they knew the good guys won and overcame that cheating because of their virtue and their valor. I'd like to show you a clip.
We'd like to see it, dude.
1 second. I happen to have a clip practically queued up here, meaning it's not yet queued up, but it's very accessible. If you go to YouTube, to the Global Wrestling Federation, Phantom X, from Parts Unknown, you will find a clip of me. Now, I'm going to share my screen. Let me pull this up real quick.
From the Global Wrestling Federation, I'm Doyle King down ringside with... Oh, no. Gary Hart is down here ringside with me. Gary, how could you allow this to happen? How could you allow this to happen? That's Sebastian right there. Look, he's even got the glasses on. They're billing him as Phantom X. I've been looking all over the building all night for Sebastian. I've been out in the parking lot. I've been everywhere. I don't know where he's at. He still isn't in this building.
No, wait a minute. Look right up there on the... That's Sebastian.
I can't believe it. That's him. As I live and breathe. Look at that. I can't believe this. I cannot believe this. Oh!
Now let me pause for just a minute to share with you a bit of what's happening. So this is my first heavyweight match against Kit Carson. Now, at the time, I was an evil wrestling manager. I helped Gary Hart, whom you just saw there with the mustache, cheat shamelessly. And Gary was constantly trying to pull one over on the good guys. So he dresses me up in red tights and sends me against a bad guy, Kit Carson. So it's really a fight of two evils. Now, Kit Carson throws me around for 5 solid minutes. We had to practice this just before we went on the stage, because the original plan was I would take a dive, he would take a dive, I would jump under him, and then spray him in the face. He'd never touch me. But fortunately, we had a way to make it look better.
Oh my! This is going to be a literal massacre. How could you allow this to happen, Gary?
Hey, I didn't even know. I was wondering all evening where Sebastian was at. That's Sebastian. He's going to get killed.
It is. It's Sebastian, and he's going to. Well, you've got to stop him, man.
Hey, everybody, you got to live with the choices you make in this world.
Well,
there's philosophy for you, right there. From the mouths of babes. Actually, from the mouth of a very seasoned professional wrestling manager, Gary Hart.
Okay, so you're gonna let him go through with it, huh?
I don't have the heart to stop him. I mean, he wants it so bad. He just thinks he can be anything he wants to be.
Well, he was turned down for a wrestling card in this match by the commissioner in the heavyweight division. I don't know if he's got a wrestling card or how he did it. He's wrestling under the name of Phantom X. He's wrestling Kit Carson.
I can't believe Sebastian. What is he trying to do up there?
124 pounds of Sebastian soaking wet against a professional.
You see there the first meeting in the ring is always attended by an attempt to make friends with your adversary. And sometimes the adversary is not willing to make friends. So you put out your best effort, and that person simply rebukes you.
Oh, look at that. Kit Carson just slapped his face.
Hey, now ain't no reason for the guy to take advantage of Sebastian. Sebastian's trying to live out his dream.
More wisdom. Important to try to live out your dream.
I wonder where he was at all night. I couldn't find him. Wonder where he was hiding at. Getting on that out. Look at that out.
There's a lot of nooks and crannies in this old building to hide in.
Well, let me tell you, I mean, we have to respect his intestinal fortitude for getting in the ring with an experienced wrestler like this Kit Carson.
Sebastian crawling over for the rope as soon as he gets put into that hammerlock, and he's waving Carson off, and Carson kicks him in the butt. Knocks him all the way to the floor.
Don't hurt your head.
Okay, so there's maybe 1,000 people at the Sportatorium in this episode, maybe 1,500, and the real action is not in the ring. The real action is in the audience. And so you've got a sort of Bertolt Brechtian kind of theater happening here with the disappearance of the invisible wall, that fourth wall, but also an Augusto Boalian kind of theater where you tear all the walls down.
I don't want nothing to happen to his brain.
Well, that's for sure.
I would in that boy's brain.
And his computer service, huh?
Anything about
No idea.
wrestling
I can't, in my imagination, believe that Sebastian has went and done it.
Well, you know, I can't believe that you are allowing him to.
I had no knowledge.
To wrestle, you know, in this match. It's insane. You're not going to try to stop him or anything.
He was supposed to be here early to set up the final arrangements with the Ebony Experience.
The final arrangements?
The final arrangements with the Ebony Experience.
Kid Carson wants to test his strength with little Sebastian. I mean, Phantom X. Should I go ahead and call him Phantom X, or?
Hey,
everybody knows that it's Sebastian. So.
Ain't nothing but a name.
Look at him put down immediately, and Carson stomping on those fingers and those toes. Look at him.
I'm sort of proud of Sebastian.
Well, you gotta give him credit. If nothing else, it may be stupid, but airplane spin and Sebastian body slam.
Oh, that is horrible. What are you doing up there?
Sebastian coming back to the outside. I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't come over. Uh-oh, look at Carson. Carson looks like he's going to get down to business here.
What are you doing?
Okay, I'm going to stop for a moment because this goes on for another 3 minutes. I'm just going to cut to the chase where I win the thing.
Moving around to the side. Side headlock on Sebastian. Sets him up. Look at him. Sebastian looks like he's just about out of it now.
Somebody has some mercy there.
Kid Carson says, what do you want me to do with it?
Can you imagine?
Look at this, Sebastian crawling for the ropes, and
hey,
Carson,
referee!
His feet down ringside. Oh, now here comes Gary Hart. Gary Hart's moving around to the side. Oh, look at that! Sebastian just grabbed something out of a green spray and sprayed it in Carson's eyes. He sprayed it in Carson's eyes. We all saw it right there. And now he's trying to pin Carson by laying on his back. Turn him over. Now, there's 1 and 2 and 3. There's a 3 count. Here's your official decision.
He pulled it off, didn't he?
I can't believe it.
And there you have it. And that's how evil can take on evil. It just fights with all its gumption. So I did this for about a year. Paid my way through grad school partly, and received my first Master of Arts degree in comparative literature at the University of Texas at Arlington, where the classics of David and Goliath, of Odysseus, and all of Troy came together in this one little box of a bouncy ring. Or the true action wasn't in the ring at all. It was in the audience. And the audience made the Sportatorium what it was. So that was my professional wrestling experience. I'm certain you have a question.
Well, a few questions. So now I see the connection between Aquinas and Sebastian Mahfood skills. That's a disputatio, right? Now you move from physical disputatio into intellectual disputatio, right? In other words, for you, philosophy is kind of intellectual wrestling. Am I correct in my assessment?
That is a beautiful way to think of it. So the intellectual wrestling with philosophy would actually be... so the philosophy itself, I found, wasn't that difficult. No offense to the philosophers in this room. Actually, I mean a great deal of respect. Because philosophy itself is who we are as human people. Philosophy is for everybody, as many of a philosopher would say. But the actual wrestling is in the synthesis between faith and reason. As Tertullian once quipped, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? What is the relationship between our faith, which we receive from divine revelation, and our reason, which we pursue humbly as we trod upon this earth to try to figure out things that we can figure out with our natural reason? So is it reasonable to be a man of faith? And how faithful are we if we rely on our reason and try to figure out, okay, wait a second, God said this, which is something we couldn't figure out, the Trinity, for instance, or perhaps some other of the divine mysteries. Yet I don't see it. I can't perceive it with my senses. That entire Aristotelian paradigm that man delights in knowing because he delights in his reason, in his senses. Where does science come into this? And how can a scientist also be a man of faith? So these were questions that were the real wrestling ground of my entry into Holy Apostles College and Seminary back in 2006 as a student in the philosophy department. This is enough for a lifelong quest, to try to understand what these things mean.
Valerie, Sebastian is telling us that he followed a road less traveled. Do you see any other, twists and turns in this evolution that you'd like to call attention to? Would you like to ask him if he's serious about all this stuff?
Well, so you ended up twisting and turning into the grooves of the academy. Your tenure at Kenrick Glennon Seminary and Holy Apostles College and Seminary was rich. So you were a teacher, you were an administrator, and a pioneer developer of an online academic program. So share with us the highlights of all those journeys in academia.
Well, I entered this journey rather by accident. That is to say, I was sitting around minding my own business, and I was pulled in the direction of theological education, quite literally, by one of my wife's mother's best friends, Dr. Suzanne Harvath, who taught at Kenrick Glennon Seminary as a psychologist. She taught in pastoral theology and pastoral studies. So Kenrick Glennon Seminary had recently benefited back in the year 2000 from a Lilly grant, Lilly Foundation out in Crawfordsville, Indiana. Or the Lilly Foundation in Indianapolis funded the Wabash Center in Crawfordsville, Indiana, to give 72 theological schools that were associated with the Association of Theological Schools that were accredited by them, to give them $300,000 grants to develop technology initiatives at their school. So Kenrick Glennon Seminary got a technology grant, and then they needed somebody who understood technology. That was part of what their grant was. We'd hire somebody who knows this stuff and that would teach it to our faculty. How do you use appropriate technologies in our face-to-face teaching and learning environments? That's the Wabash lingo. So I was teaching at a community college at the time. I just moved to St. Louis a few years before. I was preparing for my doctoral studies at St. Louis University. And by 2000, I had already finished my first full year of those studies. So I was building for my writing classes, my English 101 classes and my developmental writing classes, I was building websites. And I was building ways in which those students could interact with those websites and respond so that I would receive their responses and be able to synthesize. So a sort of a poor man's jerry-rigged learning management system. And I had developed an extensive website. So I sat down one day when Suzanne Harvath was over to the computer at my mother-in-law's house, and I started processing some data that I was receiving from my students. And she happened to walk behind me at that moment and just stood there. Now, Whenever you have a church psychologist, someone who participates certainly in various high-level archdiocesan meetings, standing behind you for a long stretch, you tend to feel the eyes boring on the back of your head and turn and say, "Hello, may I help you?" At which point she said, "I think you may." Within a week or so, I was a volunteer at Kinnard Glennon Seminary, and I volunteered for a year. I was on a teaching research assistantship, a teaching assistantship, so I couldn't take employment anywhere. But for that year, I taught 4 of their faculty how to use their computers in their classrooms, how to use the smart room, the data equipment, how to use the computer and the projector. And when I first entered, there was a tendency for people who had just received these tools, there was a tendency for them to use them like overhead transparency, data projectors, displays. And one of the faculty even took his overheads, had the secretary photocopy them, created slides, and simply used the $60,000 setup in the same way he would have used a $59 data projector, overhead transparency projector. So they hired me. They said, you've got a skill that we need. And it's not just the teachers, but the students. How can we create a learning community that can use these tools seamlessly? Because the tools they discovered were helpful for teaching and learning. Fast forward a couple of years, the grant money's gone. I'm preparing to leave because I've done my work, and they offer me the position of assistant professor. His father, Edward Richard, said, "Look, if you'll stay, we'll make you an assistant professor." I said, okay. And so 3 years later, I finished my doctorate. Finally, I get the dissertation done, and it's on something that made me the foremost authority on the use of Abrahamic eschatologies in radical African writing, among African novelists who were Marxist, for about 15 minutes. And then people started building on the work, and I discovered that I had produced something useful for the academy. But in 2006, I received my doctorate, and they said, if you stay, we'll make you an associate professor. And I said, okay, I'll stay, associate professor. I taught intercultural competencies. I taught writing. I taught a handful of courses, electives. I taught a course in Dante's Divine Comedy that I'd created. So I was happy. And the academic dean at the time, Father Larry Brennan, asked me if I could help share my understanding of the use of technologies with other seminaries in the what began as the Midwest Association of Theological Schools, or a bunch of Catholic seminaries that came together, and ultimately turned into the National Association of Catholic Theological Schools. So I built something called the Catholic Distance Learning Network, again with Wabash money. They gave us $70,000. And I taught 86 faculty members across 25 seminaries how to develop and teach online courses in a 3-year period. The grant was only for 30 people, but people kept showing up. People would say, I've heard this is happening. Can we do it? And I didn't want to say no, so I just let more people into the class. The Catholic Distance Learning Network provided me ultimately with about 150 faculty, before it morphed into something different. And that's what brought me to Holy Apostles College and Seminary. They had a program that was it's still in its early stages. It was a Master of Arts in Philosophy and a Master of Arts in Theology. And as I mentioned before, I had already jumped into the MA in Philosophy program as a student. By 2009, I received my degree, and I jumped into the MA in Theology program as a student. And my work came to the attention of President Mosey, who was the president rector at the seminary. And he said, look, we've got this online program. We want to grow it. I said, I think I can help. So I took a program that started out at, I think it was earning $150,000 a year in tuition revenues when I entered in 2011 as the interim director of online learning. of distance learning. When I left in 21, 10 years later, we were over $3 million a year in revenues. And that was simply by my toggling and adding a few things. On one hand, I had a whole bunch of students, but I had video correspondence courses. On the other hand, I had a whole bunch of faculty who didn't have any online students. They had taught classes to one another through reciprocity agreements. But over the course of a 5-year span, I think we only impacted 100 or so students who needed electives that other seminaries offered, but that their own seminary didn't. Like students at Kendrick Lennon Seminary, for instance, could take a theology and science course out of the Immaculate Conception Seminary in Huntington, New York, back before it was consolidated with St. Joseph's Dunwoody. And they did it online. And they did it because the system I set up allowed them to do it. So I shifted from priestly formation, which was being done at the seminary level, into lay formation, which was being done at the Master of Arts level. We had students coming from all over the world at one point, still do. Holy Apostles program is thriving on the building blocks, on the foundation that I created back in 2011, on a foundation that Dr. Cynthia Tulin Wilson, Father Brian Milady, and Father Mosey began in 1998 when they invited Ralph McInerney of Notre Dame fame to share his International Catholic University courses with them, and began what ultimately became an online correspondence program that morphed into a sort of flesh and blood, fully online, fully developed and energized Death Star, if you will.
That's a dizzying account of a major contribution.
May I?
But as the oldest person on this program, I want to go back to the print media, as in books, sure. BOOKS. And somebody who's almost as old is also going to jump in. Yes.
Jim, I need to go, but I asked for an exception.
All right.
May I ask a question before leaving, which is not the one that you are going to ask? Because I want to hear Sebastian's response.
Mario, of course, I don't want you to miss a meeting with your PO.
Okay. I'm very curious about the open door. I understand that is the longest running show in WCAT and radio program. How did it start? How did you hire Dr. Hanning?
Hire?
I pay him in donuts, but it's a long-standing debt.
Dunkin' Donuts.
So the Open Door is a very interesting program, and I'm so incredibly grateful for it, and for the work that the three of you, the panelists of the Open Door, have done since October of 2016. So let me step back a moment. WCAT Radio is a radio station, at least up until 2018. So from October 16 to around summer of 18, we ran live shows. So every 2 hours, I would sit down at my computer and I would start a show. And I did that for over 2 years. You actually had to physically push a button. I had equipment that did the broadcasting. And the Open Door was the very first program that came on, I think very early, like October 2nd or October 3rd of 2016. So after 2018, I realized from the numbers, it was just a data-based research, that not only could I stop pushing a button every 2 hours, but that if I did and we shifted over into podcasting, I'd get a lot more visitors. We'd get a lot more people who were actively engaged in watching the shows or listening to the shows on demand. And we were radio right up until COVID. When COVID hit and Zoom came about, a lot of the programs, like this one, went into video. And so I built a station on YouTube called WCAT TV to host the video spots. I think since 2020, we've got about 700, 800 videos that we've posted. A total of 9,000 programs just on radio shows across 75 different shows. But the Open Door was the first and the longest running. And if the other show hosts don't mind my saying so, the best. Because you guys tackle the real issues. So why a radio station at all? Why do we need WCAT Radio to spread or to facilitate the Catholic spiritual journey and to talk about a lot of other cool stuff? The radio station was an outgrowth of the publishing house. En route Books and Media opened its doors 2 years earlier and began publishing books written by the faculty at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Why even start a publishing house? Because in 2014, Holy Apostles launched its undergraduate programming. We were approved by the State Office of Higher Education in Connecticut and by the New England, what at the time was New England Association of Schools and Colleges. But we had some stiff competition. Our faculty were not as well known as other seminary faculties, other Catholic college faculties. We couldn't compete with, say, for instance, Scott Hahn out of Franciscan in Steubenville in terms of name recognition. So Father Mosey and I decided, well, there's one way to do it. We'll make our faculty famous. So I thought it would be instant success. I thought we would step onto the stage and everybody go, oh, there are the famous faculty of Holy Apostles College and Seminary. It takes a while to build the fame of a given author. Peter Kraft, for instance, or any of the other names that you may see in the world of Catholic teaching and learning, weren't always famous names. There was a point where they were just ordinary people like you and me, making their way in the world until one day they published a book and several faculty put it on their syllabi. And another day they gave a talk and it was broadcast far and wide. So in order to make our faculty famous, we needed a way to interview those faculty, to have those faculty get into the public light in terms of Catholic social media. And so Rhonda Chervin and Bob Olson and I came together and we put together this radio station called WCAT Radio, which is short for Why Catholic. WCAT is Why Catholic Radio. And why be Catholic? Well, because it's a reasonable faith. It's the ultimate in helping us understand that synthesis between faith and reason. And it's time tested for 2 millennia. And that's where we come to the very present moment, where we're able to talk about these things on a radio station that took wings as the on-air wing of En route Books and Media.
Thank you.
Did I answer the question?
You asked that question, Mario. Glad you asked that question.
But still, you haven't mentioned when did you meet Dr. Hanning?
Oh, well, Dr. Hanning was introduced to me through Bob Olson. As Bob was looking for a show host, he said to me, I could put together a couple of shows. And I said, that would be great, Bob. He says, I've got an idea for a wonderful one. It's called The Open Door. We'll get some panelists, we'll put them together, and we'll throw out interesting topics for them to discuss. We'll even bring in some people they can interview, and we'll have a great time of it, cruising the Catholic airwaves. So, Jim, you were one of the panelists that Bob Olson brought through at one point, I believe.
I met him at a hockey game.
And that would have been where you would have met him, because he was a hockey announcer for 40 years.
That's right.
The guy was incredible.
He told me where I could get some dentures that I'd never regret.
For hockey players, that's important.
Right. Okay, Mario, I'm glad you asked that question. But now I want to turn to old school stuff like books, which I continue to spell Books. And Sebastian, despite all your feats of media, you've also managed to write several important books. And you mentioned one, Dante. Tell us about the books, or at least some representative examples of them.
Oh, sure. Well, the precursor to writing books is writing articles. I've written dozens of articles, and it occurred to me one day that I had written enough in terms of articles that were I to assemble these articles together into forms of books, I would have something that would have a little more composite weight to it, where I could bring my thoughts together on a particular topic in a certain space. So Dante has been a favorite of mine ever since I took my first Dante class at the University of Texas at Arlington in 1991 under Dr. Simone Turbeville. I was a history major and was happy to pursue the life of a history professor before I stepped into Dr. Turbeville's Dante class and discovered the wonderful world of metaphor. And it turned me into an English major so quickly that as I stepped into my senior year, I took a class when I was a junior, I ended up having to switch my schedule around to take 6 English classes in one academic year in order to double major. So I ended up with a history and English major, which is kind of interesting that Italian poetry would drive me into being an English major. But as the language and letters lights the path, I formed over the years a fascination with Dante Alighieri. And in 2005, I was given the opportunity to teach a Dante class at Kendrick Glennon Seminary. And to prepare for the class, I put together mini lectures in each of the cantos. And those lectures are still online. You can see them. I posted them on YouTube in 2010 when I brought them together with video. So I took those lectures that I brought together over the course of a semester of teaching, where every morning I would get up and I'd do a 5-minute talk, and I would send that to my students. I took those lectures and I prepared a book called The Narrative Spirituality of Dante's Divine Comedy. And it was really based on the idea that Dante was a polymath. He drew from a lot of different authors, but a particular author from whom he drew that I was studying at the time was St. Thomas Aquinas. And you can see he lays out a bibliography of all the people that he's drawing from over the course of the Divine Comedy. He talks about the poets that influenced him when he's in limbo, and he puts himself a 6th in their company. And ultimately says, these were my initial influences, and Virgil was my master and savior. Well, you can see why he ended up having to walk through hell and purgatory and heaven to make it to God. The first person that he clung to was a Roman pagan whose poetry inspired him. By the time he makes it into the 5th sphere of heaven, he then lays out his theological bibliography. That's St. Thomas, St. Bonaventure, and a slew of others who are there actually in the 4th sphere of heaven among the doctors of the church and the theologians and the philosophers who understood the relationship between faith and reason. Beatrice castigates him in Canto 30 of the Purgatorio for following pagan philosophy and losing sight of divine revelation. You need the synthesis is the argument all the way through. And it was something that attracted me because of what I was learning as a lay Dominican about the importance of that synthesis between faith and reason. So the book came out of that, the narrative spirituality of Dante's Divine Comedy, how he tells a story in order to enable our spirits to grow. And you can see that growth taking place in a very real way across the stretch of the Paradiso, where he's coming into greater awareness of who he is as a person designed in the image and likeness of God. So that's that book. But I got my start writing books with Rhonda Chervin. She said, let's teach a class together on the new atheism and try to talk about the influence that authors like Richard Dawkins are having on this world, and especially in our college settings. And out of that, the lectures that we prepared for that class came a book called Catholic Realism, which talked about the value of the Catholic faith in the modern world. And there's some others. I put together with Bishop Richard Henning a book on missionary priests in the homeland in the United States. In this country, with domestic vocations down, we're drawing a lot on international priests, on missionary priests, to serve in our parishes and in our dioceses and in our seminaries, even on our faculties. So to what extent is our call to receive the fruits of all of our evangelization efforts over the past several hundred years? And we do have the Jesuits to thank for this, in part, because they were great missionaries that planted the seeds of the faith in what we know is the developing world, though some people would take issue with that moniker, with that description of the world outside of the West. Those are the areas from which we're drawing priests: Nigeria, Colombia, other places in Central and South America, Southeast Asia. And those international priests who are coming in some dioceses make up half the presbyterate. And it's a growing number. Back in 2012, I believe there were 5,000 missionary priests in this country, and that number has grown significantly since. That was only a decade ago. Same with international seminarians. Our seminaries are at a low point in their enrollments, to the point that many of the bishops are saying we have too many seminaries. When I entered theological education in 2000 at Kenrick Glennon Seminary, there were 47 major seminaries. Today, there are only 38. It's a number that will dwindle, like the minor seminaries did when they sprouted up after 1958 all over the place, and then were relatively solidly in their decline by 1983. So that's that book. During COVID, as soon as COVID hit in March of 20, I began organizing webinars for theological faculty. How do you do emergency remote instruction? They needed to know. Emergency remote teaching was the law of the land for the rest of the year, even into the spring of 21. So I formed an organization back in 2013 called the Faith-Based Online Learning Directors. And for the past 10 years, we put out material that help distance learning programs become more authentically themselves. That is, how do we take whatever school we are, whatever our mission is, and promulgate that or pursue that in a certain way, in a particular way online, to ensure that we continue to meet our mission in a teaching and learning environment where the students and the faculty come together only on Zoom, only in asynchronous discussion boards. So the faith-based online learning directors were in an ideal position to take a leadership role in 2020. And we put together a number of webinars and a number of talks and a number of papers. We brought those papers together into a book called Teaching and Learning, Online Teaching and Learning, faith-based teaching through the internet. So some of these books were very easy to put together. We had a team of people who already had content, and I had formed the publishing house in 2015. So at this point, I'm publishing about 2 books a week. In 2022, I published 100. I'll hit 100 in 2023 as well. I'm already at number 58 or 59 for this year. So producing a book is like rolling clay snakes. It's incredibly easy. It's fun working with the authors. There's a lot of deadlines in the Catholic world because everybody's trying to meet a Saints' Day. Like yesterday, we published a book called Cloud of Witnesses. for to make the Feast of Our Lady of Grace. 2 days before, I published a book called the Eucharistic Revival Project in order to make the date for the feast of Pope Pius X, who is the Pope of the Eucharist. So that's kind of fun, and it's kind of exciting. And then the marketing and promotions that happens afterwards is even more fun and exciting, because the authors have a great deal of zeal in order to promote their message, which I help them learn how to turn into a product. So in many cases, many of the authors I receive are first-time Catholic authors. They have a message, and they don't necessarily have an audience, and they don't know how to turn that message into in commercial terms, rather crass commercial terms, we would call a product. So that can then be used, measured in sales, in terms of the extent of the message. And I've got maybe 180 authors at this point, and 358 total books, 359 after today. We're publishing another one this evening. So that's the way the publishing house has rolled. That's the way my own contribution in the form of books has rolled. There's a couple of books I haven't mentioned, but to give you a representative sampling, the publishing house is also developing a reproducing seminary journal, which was a production of the National Catholic Educational Association's seminary department from 1995 to about 2014, when the seminary department closed. This journal collects the best thoughts of formation from the faculties of the 38 remaining Catholic seminaries and disseminates them. So we got our first spring 2023 issue of the journal out recently. This fall, we'll put out the fall issue, and then we'll be back in circulation with the journal. And hopefully the journal and the book productions and these radio shows. I mean, the Open Door is an excellent program. There are 74 more excellent programs on WCAT Radio. These resources and these materials are of great benefit to anyone studying their faith in lay formation or in priestly formation. So that may get us to the end point of, or to the starting point of the next question.
Valerie, are you as dizzy as I am?
It's amazing what you've drawn from. I mean, you're just like going around picking flowers and gifts from the Lord in all corners and putting them together so that other people can benefit from that.
What about a book on homeschooling, Valerie?
I think we lost Valerie.
Yeah, she's already gathering materials for that book.
My guess is she'll be back.
She moves fast.
So to answer Valerie's unasked question, I draw my inspiration from the saints. There's a saint that helps with anything. And if you've got a problem, it's likely you'll be able to find a saint to whom you can pray for intercession. And she talked about gathering flowers, and moving through the fields of our rich Catholic intellectual tradition. Well, you can drop a pen on any of the saints who can help a person with that kind of endeavor. Saint Francis of Assisi is noted for having preached to the animals, having embraced a life of poverty, which is very much like the life of an intrepid Catholic publisher and producer. The ministries that we pursue or that we assist are all very important. And behind every book is a ministry. Behind every show is a ministry. So to what extent can this radio station and this publishing house help support the ministries of those who seek its services in the spread of their message? So that's something I've been pursuing.
For example, the New Oxford Review, with which I've been associated since 1990 or so.
Now that's pre-internet.
Has as its patrons St. Vincent Pallotti and the Palatine Fathers. And
all right,
they have a real commitment to Catholic books, publication, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So there's some illustration of exactly the point you were making.
And they've reviewed our books.
Of course.
Some of the onward books have received very good reviews in the New Oxford Review and other places.
Well, Sebastian, we've come to the end of the hour, and it's going to take me the rest of the day to process all the sorts of things that you've been laying out for us. And as you say, we all have our ministries where we have a call, a universal call to holiness. And certainly our call to holiness draws on more than our ambitions. It draws on the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. And we end every show here on the Open Door with the gospel for the day. And this comes from Matthew. It's very familiar, and there's so much to learn from it. Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off, and he went out again around noon and around 3 o'clock and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, he found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received his usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden and the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I am not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do what I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus the last will be first, the last will be first, and the first will be last. Come, Lord Jesus, come." Amen. Thank you so much, Sebastian. We appreciate this very, very much. We are so much in your debt, and we thank you for your stupendous efforts. And we haven't even talked about your worldwide travels, even though I referred to your peregrinations and your peripateticism in my intro. So thanks again.
You will have to have me back.
Right, we will. From behind the scenes to on the front line. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.